We've solved many types of equations before, but today we're going to be looking at some equations that involve absolute value in them. And they'll be really easy to solve as long as we follow a few simple steps. The first one being that we're going to have to isolate the value first today. And what that means is we're going to have to get the absolute value to be the only thing on its side of the equal sign. The second thing we're going to have to do is create two equations. One of those equations is going to use the same sign, and the other one's going to be using the opposite sign that's in the problem. And this will make more sense once we start working out example number 1. Example number 3, after we've made our two equations, we're going to be solving both of these equations to get an answer. And once we've gotten that answer, number 4 is the most important step for today. We have to check it because sometimes the answers we get don't really work with the equation, and if we plug them back in, it's going to give us a crazy statement. So we're going to have to check them to make sure that our answers are actually solutions, because they won't always work. Example number 1, we're having to get the absolute value by itself first. So we're going to move this 5 by subtracting it. And we'll cross that out there and get absolute value of x is equal to 6. So that takes care of step 1. Now we're on to step 2. We have to make two equations. And what I mean by the same sign is we're going to be dropping the absolute value. So we write down what's in the absolute value, and we use the same sign of the number. And we've got 6 here, so we're going to make that a positive 6 since we started off with positive 6 here. So we've done an equation with the same sign. Now we're going to do one with the opposite sign. So we're going to drop the absolute value again, and this time instead of making it positive 6, we're going to make it negative 6. So there's our second equation using the opposite sign. Step number 3 says solve both equations, and when you solve an equation, you're having to get the variable by itself. And if you look at our two equations, our x is already by itself, so that step is taken care of for us here. We don't have to worry about isolating that. And step number 4 is checking the answer. When we check our answer, we're going to take our two answers that we've gotten, and we're going to plug them back into the original problem. So I'm going to replace x. First I'm going to work with this positive 6. Plug that in, and then write everything else down that we started with. And we get absolute value of 6 is going to give me positive 6. And 6 plus 5 is 11. That's a true statement. So I know that x equals 6 will work. Now it's time to try negative 6. So I'll take the negative 6 and plug it in place of x inside the absolute value. And the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. 6 plus 5 is 11, so that one works as well. So for my example 1, we're going to have two answers, x equals 6 and x equals positive 6. Let's take a look at a scenario where we have some answers that won't work out. Let's look at example 2. We're going to be following the same steps. We have a little bit more on the outside of our absolute value this time, but we're going to take care of it the same way we would if that absolute value wasn't there. So if this is an equation that read negative 8 equals 3w minus 2 instead of the absolute value, we would still add 2 on both sides. And I would get negative 6 equals 3w. And since we're dealing with absolute value, I'm going to put the absolute values there. Now to get that 3 away from the right side, we're going to be dividing both sides by 3. And you can see here this is going to give me negative 2 is equal to the absolute value of w. We've taken care of step 1. We've gotten the absolute value isolated. Now it's time to build two equations. So we're going to use one that uses the same sign, so negative 2 is what we started with, and our other equation uses the opposite sign, so the opposite of negative would be positive. Alright, third step says solve the equation, and since our w's are already by themselves, we've solved them, and it's time to check. So let's try this negative 2 first. We're going to go back up to the original problem and plug in a negative 2 for our w. Alright, So absolute value of negative 2 is going to give me positive 2. And 3 times 2 is 6. Now, 6 minus 2 is 4, not negative 8. That is not a true statement, which means that W equals negative 2 is not one of my solutions. We're going to have to try the same thing with positive 2 and see if positive 2 works. So I'll go back to the original equation, and this time we're plugging in a positive 2. Absolute value of positive 2 is 2. And I think you guys can see where we're going here. We're going to end up with the same thing that we did with our last solution. We still have 6 minus 2, which we know is 4, which means that positive 2 is not a solution either, because that is not a true statement. So in this case, what we have here is something that we call a no solution. So rather than having a number for our answer for this equation is going to be no solution. Nothing that we solved will work. So we're going to write that down and move on. Example number 3, I want us to work together because this has got quite a few steps involved in it, but it's manageable as long as we follow our steps. First step says isolate the absolute value. And on the outside of the absolute value, we've got a negative 8. We do have a lot of stuff inside, those 2 7s here, but we're not going to worry about those right now. All I'm worried about is what's on the outside, and that's this negative 8. And I'm going to add it on both sides to get rid of it on the left side. So I'll get absolute value of 7b minus 7 is equal to 56. Now, there is nothing over there with this absolute value, and by that I'm saying there's nothing on the outside of it. We just have the absolute value and then what's on the inside, and so that's what we considered isolated. Now it's time for step 2. We're building 2 equations. So we drop the absolute value, and we're going to have 7b minus 7, and it says build one that uses the same sign, so we're going to keep 56 positive. My other equation will be basically the same thing, only this time we're going to use negative 56. So my 7b minus 7 is going to stay the same for both of my equations. The only thing that's different is that we're using one positive 56 and one negative 56. And we're going to be solving these 2-step equations the way we have been doing in the past. So we'll add 7 on both sides first. And get 7b is equal to 63. We have to divide both sides by 7. So my first possible solution is 9. We're going to do the same thing for the second equation. This time I got negative 7. So my 2 possible answers are 9 and negative 7, and as you guys saw in that last example, we've got to check both of them because they may not work. So let's go back to our original problem. We're going to plug in the 9 first. So I'll put that in my absolute value in place of b, and we're going to see if we can get the left side to equal 48. Now inside we're going to treat those absolute values like parentheses and grouping symbols. So 7 times 9, that would give me 63. (63) minus 7 is going to be 56. So the absolute value of 56 would be 56. And 56 minus 8 is 48. So we do have a solution that works this time. 9 at least works. We still have to check 7 because there is a chance that negative 7 won't work. Let's try it out. Plug that in place of b inside the absolute value. we're trying to get 48 again. Alright. 7 times negative 7 is negative 49. Negative 49 minus 7 would give us a negative 56. Absolute value of negative 56 would give us positive 56. And we end up getting the same exact thing we did up here with our first solution when we checked it. 56 minus 8 is indeed 48. So b equals negative 7 also works. So for example 3, we do have two solutions. B equals 9 and b equals negative 7.